The Missouri is a museum in Oahu. The sister ship, named for the state due north, is also one at the Port of Los Angeles. Pete.
What is the
Too much
Illinois?
time. Hallie.
What is the Iowa?
That's it.
Welcome back, listeners, to Rock Hard Caucus. This is episode 94. I am Justin, and I've got Natalie here with me.
Hey.
We do have a guest, but before we get into our discussion with our guest, I just want to say at the top, we will not be discussing Dick Milks tonight.
Congratulations on going from your shadow ban to your purgatory.
A regular ban. And, well, I don't plan on discussing this, but I don't think we're going to talk about the Mike Franken thing right now. We're going to wait for another episode.
Thank you for sparing us.
We will be talking about it, but we aren't going to subject our guest to.
Yeah. We've got other issues to proceed that we're on the labor beat still. So tonight we've got Ross Grooters here, who, oh shit, I forgot to write down which union you're in. But Ross works for the railroad. So what union are you in, Ross?
I'm in the engineers operating crafts, so the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen. And I also co-chair a cross-craft organization nationally of railroad workers called Railroad Workers United.
Yeah, I've seen that. That's been growing because there's discontent among railroad workers that I've seen recently. And I think that's going to be the main topic of discussion tonight.
That there is, growing discontent.
So I guess a good way to get started, since we were just talking about this before we started recording, Ross, what kind of hours do you work?
Most jobs on the railroad are on call 24/7, 365 days a year. So I work all hours, and not necessarily do I know when those hours will be very far in advance. So work cooperating will get this recorded tonight without me getting called into work.
Yeah. That sounds kind of unreasonable, I think, to require somebody to be available to start working at any time.
Literally always. That's so fucked up.
Even the scheduled jobs we have can be pretty unreasonable. Like I was on one job that worked 2 morning shifts, an afternoon shift, and then 2 overnight shifts in that order. So even some of the scheduled jobs are just absolutely asinine.
Can you repeat what that schedule was?
I worked a morning, another morning, an afternoon going in about 3:30, and then 2 overnights going in a little before midnight.
Okay, so that's 5 days there.
Consecutively, yes, 5 days.
Wow, yeah, it seems impossible to shift your sleeping schedule that quickly.
Maybe bleep this out, but for that. I say that half jokingly. I really do. I think a lot of folks get by on just caffeine, sleep deprivation, and they do have a growing industry around sleep. You see sleep centers that have popped up all over Iowa and all over the country for people to find ways to get better sleep, because I don't think this is just railroad workers. It's an extreme example, but I think workers all over the country are being pushed into these ridiculous schedules, and it takes a toll. And so now there's a medical profession dedicated to figuring out how we can keep people rested and get them their sleep. And sometimes that does involve prescription medication.
Yeah, it does. Well, what exactly do you do for the railroad? Like, what's so important that they need you to be ready to rush into work at any moment?
So the railroad as it operates today is unscheduled, and so they really want everybody at their beck and call. And what I do is I'm a locomotive engineer, so I operate a train or drive a train. So typically I would get called by the railroad. I'd have 2 hours to go in. I'd arrive. We'd get our paperwork that talks about the scope of work that we have, and then I would sit down with a conductor who's in the Smart Transportation Division, and we sort of work hand in hand to discuss the work, figure out how we're going to get it done, and then take a train, say, from Des Moines to Mason City or Des Moines to Clinton, and then we tie up our tour of duty there and get our rest, and then wonder when the railroad will call again and start the process all over.
Yeah. Do you have to then take a train back home?
Yes.
Or do you have other means of transportation? Okay.
Typically, you get another train line up on the other side when you're getting your rest, and then you figure out when you're going to get called and take a train back. Sometimes they will do what's deadheading, which is probably one of the coolest parts of the job, I guess, where we just get in a cab and ride from point A to point B, a cab or a van, and then tie up that way. And tie up, I guess, would be jargon for in the shift, so it'd be like clocking out.
Okay, yeah, right. Like wrapping up. Well, now that I know that you actually drive trains, you're an engineer, we do have a couple of questions from our friend Chuck, who is not able to be here tonight. He wanted to ask you, Ross, what is your favorite type of choo-choo?
I want to say something smart ass like Charleston, but that candy sucks, doesn't it? I favorite is the one that I'm not on. Sorry, Chuck.
And then he wondered if you were into Thomas the Train Engine as a child.
I was not. Our child, our 16-year-old, when she was younger, she got into Thomas for a good few years, and that was kind of funny to see. I think it was because she knew I worked for the railroad, but she quickly grew out of that, thankfully.
Thankfully? You don't want, like...
I don't want... I wouldn't want my children or anybody else listening to follow in my footsteps. Wouldn't wish this life on my worst enemies, to be honest. It's really difficult.
Wow, okay. So how did you, I guess, get into this line of work?
Well, much like a lot of young people, I couldn't figure out what to do with my life, and I had a number of coworkers who left the industry, left retail, and went to work for the railroad. And over the years, just a growing number said, "Hey, you would like doing this." Eventually, one of those was a good friend of mine, and I think we were at one of the Lord of the Rings movies, and I was just having a miserable time at work, and I was just like, "So, tell me about this railroad thing." And kind of the rest, as they say, is history. I will say that the industry has changed a lot over the years. There's something called precision scheduled railroading that started in the last 5 to 10 years.
Mm-hmm. This recent. So this is like new. Okay.
Yes. So the sort of the lean production that came to other industries was slow in coming to the railroad. And only recently did investment capital come in and financialize the railroads. And so that's a lot of the reason you're seeing the trouble you are now is they've implemented this 3-letter acronym, and anytime you hear an acronym from your boss, run the other way as fast as you can. The precise part of it has nothing to do with operating trains. It has to do with how precisely can we cut the operation and force workers into doing more work faster with less people.
Right.
And so that's what we're working under today, and that's what's caused so much of the hardships. We've lost about 30% of union railroad employees in just the last 5 or 6 years, and it might even be higher than that. But so the work is still there. The work is the same amount. You just have fewer people doing it. So that, I think, kind of sets up why and you'll probably ask about this, is why there is this growing labor dispute nationally.
Yeah, that definitely sets the scene. And that term again was precision what?
Scheduled railroading, precision scheduled railroading.
Okay.
I think that some like retail companies do that as well. And it's like kind of similarly, it's not as extreme as what you're saying as far as it being 24 hours, but it is kind of like you're on call and you never fucking know. I think that's kind of a private equity bullshit in a lot of industries. So hopefully the like pushback will start coming elsewhere as well.
I certainly hope so. You have my union, BLET, is a part of Teamsters, and so you'll have UPS workers going through kind of a similar process here in the lead up to their contract negotiations in 2023. And I know that I've heard things like Ingredient, if I'm saying that right, that the commercial food workers are fighting, and we see what's happening at Starbucks and flight attendants and other industries. I think workers have just realized through the pandemic how challenging it is to go to work in these conditions, and have realized their power to fight back.
Yeah. So what is the situation with, like, is everybody that you work with part of the union, or do you have a lot of people like, not joining up because it's a right to work state?
So on the railroads, it's a closed shop. We fall under federal labor law. It's not actually the same labor law as everybody else. We're under the Railway Labor Act, which was passed in the 1920s, essentially to keep us working and prevent us from being able to strike. And there's 12 to 14 different craft unions across the country that work under that. And we don't have, everyone is in the union who is a laborer or has a non-management job.
Okay, yeah. Does that make it, I guess, as you've seen conditions sort of deteriorate over the last 5 or 6 years, and you said you started around the time of a Lord of the Rings movie, so that's probably like early mid 2000s. So for a while things were not quite as bad, and then in recent years it's been getting worse. So have you seen, since you're all part of this union, I assume you have some kind of like meetings. So as things have gotten worse, have there been a lot of discussions among the workers about, how do we fix this? How do we resist the continuing deterioration of our working conditions?
Yeah, this occurs on a daily basis in my workplace. We're I think kind of some self-reflection. I think all of us would see us as really good at bitching. We're a bunch of like we sit around and complain about our work. I mean, we've got 2 people on a train ride for 8 to 12 hours and maybe longer. We've got plenty of time to do that. Unfortunately, it's all very compartmentalized, and I think unlike some of the other labor organizations that I've seen, there's not a lot of internal organizing going on. A lot of things have been pushed to an arbitration and mediation process where we just file the grievance, and down the road, 3 or 4 years later, perhaps we'll get paid pennies on the dollar for whatever violation that the rail carriers created. And it's really disempowering. It doesn't help us realize or achieve our power. And most of those cases, I'd say maybe 1 in 7 or something, we win those, and the rest we don't. So we're playing on unfavorable terrain when we go through that process. And I think it's only recently that the job has just gotten so terrible and so just unbearable that workers have really started a lot of self-organizing and started to really think about how do we fight back. And we saw that Wednesday across the country. There were dozens of pickets that sprung up with basically a 48-hour call. Some folks put out a call to picket on public property outside of rail yards, and just a simple informational picket like that, which, I'm sure a lot of our listeners are activists, and our listeners. It's your podcast.
Well, they're listening to you now, aren't they?
Yeah, a lot of the listeners are activists, and so that just something that simple that we would take for granted or think, yeah, this is a tool in the toolkit that we need to use. We're just starting to kind of rediscover some of those things. So hopefully we can keep building on that because as again we'll talk about, the Railway Labor Act is designed to prevent us from striking.
Right, because what you do is kind of essential for the continued operation of the economy. So they need you there.
I was wondering if you could explain, I've seen a lot of talk about employment points and having a point system, and it sounds unbelievable. Could you explain to us how it works and what happens if you take a sick day?
I really can't explain how it works. It's when I figure it out, I'll share it with you.
Fucked up to me.
It's like some, I don't know, picture
okay,
the
how
worst.
many points do you have?
Oh, that's a good question, and it depends on the railroad you're on. So you can have, you can either accrue points, so you can build them up, and after you cross a certain threshold, it instantly triggers a disciplinary action. Or with the case of some workers, they start with a certain number of points and they're deducted. Right now I'm at 10 points. I'll share that. And maybe this weekend I'll end up at 15 or 20. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But yeah, it's there is just, imagine the worst board game or strategy game you can think of, and some points matrix. Like you've got all these different, like it depends on what job you do. It depends on what day it is. It depends. Is it a weekend or a holiday? How did you take time off? How did you choose to call in and lay off? We call it. It's beyond. You're right. It's unbelievable, and it's unflexible, and it doesn't really acknowledge the fact that we still have a virus that's deadly going around that can kill people if we keep spreading it. And so it's just, yeah, I like how you frame it, Natalie. It's unbelievable.
10 sounds like not a lot of points. Do you know what's the most number of points you've ever had?
If I recall correctly, we can accrue up to 28, and I think I've been at 27. So I kind of have gamed the system. I mean, we all have to, right? If we want,
I mean that's what this incentivizes. Yeah.
and yeah, I don't want to be at work.
Yeah, I saw someone on Twitter say that in order to witness the birth of their child, they lost so many that they had to then be on call for 2 weeks straight, like 24 hours a day, and always be answering for 2 full weeks just because they wanted to go see their baby be born. I mean, that's not a humane way for people can't live like that. I
was in Omaha for another informational picket that we did with the union for the Berkshire Hathaway meetings, and I heard some stories. The BLET Women's Auxiliary was there, and I just heard some heart-wrenching stories about some of the experiences from these families. We had one of the women there talking about a child who unfortunately didn't make it and had congenital heart trouble, and just the stresses that put under the family for their husband who works on the railroad to try to make it to doctor's appointments or even just be there to be with their family as they lost this child. I'm kind of getting teary-eyed just remembering her telling that story. And yeah, it's not sustainable, and nobody should have to work like this.
That's so fucked up.
Yeah.
So there's some kind of negotiations going on now. I've seen some reporting on what's been happening over the last, few weeks, but I feel like it hasn't been super clear, like, what the outcome's going to be. But I remember seeing something about the union, like, winning one sick day, and that was sort of framed as, like, a huge win.
So the actual, and I feel like I'm correcting you, so I apologize, but we actually did win one paid day off. You're right. One paid day off, not a sick day, just a paid day off. And then, this is just how I think a lot of people listening will probably be like me, and if you've got to means test it, if it's wonky, if you've got to try to figure out rules around it, it's just not worth a shit.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they gave us was 3 days that we could take off a year, 4 medical appointments, 30 days in advance, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday.
What the fuck? What the hell? So if your baby has congenital heart failure, you have to be sure that your baby only has heart failure 1 month in advance on Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll be sure to plan.
I know that the way it works right now with like doctors and hospitals is like you get to choose very specifically when you show up. Like that. I'm already
planning for when I'm on my deathbed. I'm putting that date on the calendar right now.
You're using an actuarial chart to plan ahead, and so you can put in for your death day.
So I assume when you reach 0 points on this point system, they just fire you?
So it depends on the carrier. Under some of the systems, you accrue points, and once you cross that threshold, then they take disciplinary action. Disciplinary action on the railroad, I'll get into this, but some of them are you have the points, and then once you reach 0, that'll trigger the disciplinary action. Again, mileage may vary based on where you work, but once that happens, the attempt will be to fire you. They'll send a notice, certified letter that you'll get, and you've got to come to this investigation. You've lost your job. On the railroad, it's not uncommon to get fired, or at least what we call get fired. But the good thing is we have a union that'll go to bat and fight for us. And so when people have been fired in the past, what happens is there's an arbitration. There's a hearing. They collect evidence that is sent on to a national arbitrator or mediator who will look at the case and take in the evidence. And it's not uncommon for a railroad worker to get fired for 30 days, 6 months, a year, and eventually come back to work. In fact, there's been in the past sort of an industry around it where we can purchase job insurance that will protect us and get at least keep the roof over our head when those things occur.
Is that just like putting someone in their place, kind of?
I mean, it can be. I mean, we all have different personalities, so you can imagine that managers might have an axe to grind with somebody, or I mean, some of it is I don't know. I always want to blame the boss, but sometimes we're pushed. As you can imagine, under those scheduling conditions, we're pushed hard, and sometimes mistakes can happen. And so I'm federally licensed to get that renewed every couple of years, and there are things like running a red signal that it's non-negotiable. There's a set penalty and time off for that, and they'll revoke your license for that period of time.
I may have been unclear. So when your point system, you have 10 now. Are you on the system where it's bad to run out or to get too much?
Yeah, no, you were clear, Justin. I was just trying to not reveal. I think revealing that would probably reveal who my employer is.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Okay. Oh, gotcha. I mean, doesn't it make it more, if you're working under these conditions where you're on call 24 hours a day, isn't it more likely that you're going to make mistakes like the red light thing? Yeah. Like, it just seems like with something as serious as a massive train, if you're exhausted, if you're working overnights and then mornings and just, it makes you more likely to make sense. It has to.
Natalie, I think there's a future if you want to represent union members in the future. You're right. Like that's exactly right. No notes.
Yeah, I mean, this is very similar to Stella and I talked to Chris Eby, who works for Ingredion, a few weeks ago, and it's the same shit everywhere. It's like they work you too many hours, and it's bad for your like personal life, your relationship with your family, and it's also like you're running extreme risks by like overworking people in jobs where dangerous things can happen if you are not like running at 100%.
And as I said earlier, it's not just the railroad. I'm glad that came up in your conversation, because we've organized some health and safety conferences around the country with RWU, in particular, trying to build relationships with environmentalists. And it was 2015, I believe, we did one in the Richmond, California area, the Bay Area. And at the time, there were some striking refinery workers that came up and joined railroaders and environmentalists to have these conversations and organize, and found the same things. Same thing with nurses who are constantly fighting staffing issues, and we saw the strike in Minnesota here. Mm-hmm. And so this is just the way it all comes back to the C word. This is just how capitalism functions, and pushes everybody to their limits and beyond. They literally do stress testing on the railroad, where they will try to flood a particular terminal with as many rail cars and trains as possible to see where the point is it doesn't function. And then once they figure that out, they'll then kind of reset the system and figure out ways to do more, and then do it again. And they'll keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And unless we as workers, whether it be on the railroad or in the medical profession or food workers, unless we stand up and start to fight back against that, they're going to keep doing it.
Whew. So you said the word strike. This is, obviously a strike among railroad workers would be a huge deal in the country, because this is how stuff gets from one place to another place. It's a very important part of this whole system. And
how am I going to get my cat wigs off of Amazon if you people aren't working? I just think it's disturbing that you would suggest that.
I'm sorry, your cat, what?
I don't buy cat wigs, I'm joking.
She's allergic to cats, so that wouldn't even...
I'm allergic to cats.
This bit doesn't work. We need to redo this.
I just wanted to make sure I heard it properly, and that there wasn't a glitch in the matrix. I'm gonna go and Google cat wigs after this, and
I'm just saying, how will Americans get all their bullshit all the time?
Yeah, or dumb crap.
Stupid shit we order.
So, I mean, supply chain has become a buzzword, right? Because we've had all the issues that have been exacerbated by the pandemic, and it's really not just the pandemic. It's just the sort of that real time, on demand, the nature of the way they've tweaked the supply chain to kind of hyper financialize it, I'll call it. And so if you picture the supply chain, let's just take the U.S. So a container comes in on ship from China overseas. It's unloaded in a port. So you've got port workers there. And from there, you have a trucker that will truck it to a train a short distance. And then it'll get loaded on the train, and it'll start its way across the country. And so that's sort of where my job comes in. And then eventually it'll get to where it's dropped off and unloaded by truck again and goes to a warehouse. And then finally, I mean, I think this is important for listeners. We're all on that supply chain, whether we're kind of upstream or downstream. But where that ends is with the consumer, right? We get our crap. We get our whatever it is that we're getting. Yeah. And, if you look around the room as you're listening, 90% of everything you see at some point was in a shipping container and came by truck and train to get to where it is today. And it might have been the raw materials that make it up. But 90% of everything you're looking at around you came that way. And so we have an enormous amount of power as workers if we're on that train. Now, consumers have some power, right? Like you hear like, oh, well, we can just boycott or whatever. But like the power there is much less than, say, the port worker who's at a choke point. And if they don't work, then I don't work. And so when we talk about a strike on the railroad, and this is why the RLA is designed to stop a strike on the railroad,
Right.
a strike on the railroad would just cripple that system. So when you think about that and the potential for a rail strike, it does have far-reaching ramifications. We already transport what are called shutdown cars, and the goods on those cars are important enough to where they expedite that freight. If that doesn't arrive wherever it's going, that industry or that business is going to shut down. So all those workers will be waiting. And if you think about a strike, that would be happening all over the country. There was a presidential emergency board formed in this process. It's part of the RLA. It's pretty confusing. I don't want to go into it. But the last time that happened was when President Obama was in office. And there was a big study about the economic impacts. And within 2 weeks, just in manufacturing and like light industrial, there would be 1 million layoffs in the United States if rail traffic stopped. At least that's what the Obama administration study found.
Yeah. Obviously, this would have huge ramifications. I mean, if it comes to that, like, if this is what has to happen for the people who make all of this, work, if a strike needs to happen for you to have a normal, reasonable life, I mean, that's what it is. But all of the powers that be obviously do not want that to happen. Like, no matter what, no strike. I did read something about how Congress could just force a contract through if the negotiations don't end up, bearing fruit. How does that work? Do you know?
So right now we have a TA or tentative agreement before the operating crafts that we're in a question and answer period about, and we'll start voting on the middle of next month and know by the middle of November whether or not that passes. But ultimately, if we do not approve that contract, it will fall into the hands of Congress, and Congress will legislate what agreement we're going to be working under. And likely that's going to be, I mean, this is speculation, but that's probably the agreement that we are turning down. That isn't meeting our needs for quality of life, that isn't giving us the sick time we need, that isn't addressing adequate staffing, and it is just generally creating unsafe working conditions and putting a lot of stress on the freight rail system. This is a brewing crisis that will not go away with this contract. If we see this contract implemented, we're going to be in the same situation, still organizing and fighting back, and it's going to continue to erode freight rail service. And we've had a lot of attention on that in the recent years with precision scheduled railroading and places like the Surface Transportation Board looking at the problem and trying to understand and how do we regulate the railroads. The railroads are in the United States are an anomaly worldwide in that they're privatized.
Right.
Most freight rail systems in the world are publicly owned. Now, the companies that operate on them might be public or might be a traded company, but so privately owned. But the actual system itself is going to be a publicly owned system, and that goes for a lot of. I mean, if we think about interstate highways or the bus system, they're not run for a profit.
Right, yeah. And it would make sense for this to be publicly owned because we are so reliant on it for stuff to get from one place to another. Why should we not all be invested in that, collectively?
Yes, yeah.
So these pickets that have been going on, have you seen a lot of support from outside of the rail workers for these pickets?
It's really interesting. I mean, in the media, and I'll start with the media because that's where we get a lot of our information, it's kind of been a mixed bag. There's been some good reporting. There's been some really bad reporting. Obviously, a lot of media is run for investment capital, and the richest among us are run for and by. And so you see some stories that are absolutely trying to pin this issue on us. Mm-hmm. But I think I see a good amount kind of on the other side from publications like The Guardian or in these times or something like that kind of are a little more neutral or just sympathetic to working people. And so the coverage has been a mixed bag. But what I will say is, in the comment sections, if you look, I feel like most people sort of inherently get it, and so
yeah, I agree.
this isn't completely the case, but you're going to look at the comments and it's going to be like, yeah, we get this, yeah, we're workers too, and face the same conditions, and maybe not this extreme, but so I think there is sympathy. I think the biggest misconception right now is everybody thinks that after the Biden administration sort of took that victory lap with Marty Walsh brokering a deal with the unions last Thursday, I think there was a common misconception that this is over, and it's not done yet. And I think that's why you see these pickets that kind of sprung up over the early part of this week to kind of keep reminding people that, yeah, stay tuned. We're still fighting for safe staffing levels, safer working conditions, quality of life improvement, adequate time off, paid sick time, affordable health care, like all the things that everyone as a worker needs. We're sort of fighting the fight for just workers in general, and it affects us as railroad workers. But these are things that we all sort of need to unite, and struggles that we all need to help each other with.
Yeah. It's not everyone has reached that sort of class consciousness, but I do think, like you're saying, like, you know, most of us do work to survive. So I think it is, you know, most people can be brought to the light through that path, because, you know, we all are suffering under these same conditions most of the time.
I don't think we would have seen 300 Starbucks stores across the country. I think it's around 300 or more now that have organized. I don't think we'd see that if that wasn't the case, if there wasn't a growing awareness of that. And I've mentioned Starbucks because I like coffee, but it's not. I'm not any, because my job is seen as more important, or I don't know, has more glamour to it, or whatever the case may be. What I do isn't any more or less important than a barista who has a skill making my pumpkin spice latte.
Well, you need that caffeine to get through a week of, you know, 2 morning shifts and then 2 overnight shifts.
That's right.
It's all part of the same system.
How do you answer? So I always see people ask this, and I think the answer is obvious, but to the person who says, well, why don't you just leave this job if it's so bad?
Natalie, I often think about at work when I have a moment, what would I do with my life? What would I do better? And I think we often hear in left circles, like, you struggle where you're at. You sort of, you know, I'm not going to go and move to Canada because it's bad here. I'm going to end up with some of the same struggles there and have to start all over. So I guess you kind of struggle where you're at. And so this is where I've been for 2 decades. I've invested a lot in that. And I feel like that my role is to help myself and my coworkers fix that problem. And so that's where I'm at today. Is I just can't imagine going somewhere else and having to kind of rebuild from square one and be stuck with some of the same issues. They're gonna some of them will be different, but I'll have some of the same issues, and I'm gonna continue to kind of struggle where I'm at for as long as I can. That said, I think you are going to see, with this agreement, if it's passed as it is, you're going to continue to see people leave the rail industry. You're going to continue to see the rail carriers squeeze workers harder and harder, and you're going to see less people doing the work and less people wanting to go into the work. So it's sort of a manufactured crisis, and the reason they're doing it is they don't want any workers. So eventually they'd fully automate a train. So a 3-mile long train going through your community might have 1 person or no people on it if we don't fight this fight. And so I guess I'm there for a lot of reasons and don't leave for a lot of reasons. One of them being I'm too dumb to figure out what else I can do. But the other, just we're going to struggle wherever we're at. And so I'm going to struggle here and build those connections and fight.
Yeah, we are very much on the same wavelength there. Like, I think that's a major theme of like this podcast is like, yeah, we're all
Like,
here
you
in
don't
Iowa.
leave-
Like,
Yeah, you don't just leave Iowa, you don't leave your community, you don't leave the people behind on the railroad. You make it better. I just always see people saying that, so I wanted to say, like, here's the answer, Of like, you don't just leave people behind. What happens to there's even fewer people, and they're going to suffer even more.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Yeah, and I mean, I think everywhere kind of sucks. So, like, you should start where you have, like, some sort of advantage because you're already, like, used to it, and then, try to improve things as much as you can. This will probably be, like, the topic of a future episode, but I've been organizing one of my workplaces, so... So I've very much been on that path, that goal of, like, make the place you're already at better.
Yeah, let us know how we can help you.
Rather than, searching for some mythic, like, good workplace.
Do you see, like, are there a lot fewer people joining are there a lot of younger engineers?
So you'd start off as a conductor. They are hiring some people, but they're struggling. So I'm going to make up numbers because I can't remember, but when I went to hire on the railroad, the hiring session was very much trying to weed people out. So they would do everything they could to discourage you. They'd talk about how we work in all kinds of weather conditions at all hours of the day and weekends and nights. And so they'd really discourage people to weed people out and get them to sort of self-select and leave. Mm-hmm. And then you go through, like, kind of the testing of, like a reading comprehension test, a physical and that sort of stuff before they sit down and interview you. And we started with a packed room of, I don't know, probably 30 or 40 people, and, eventually whittled it down. And today I'm hearing that there's some of those hiring sessions where they don't have people show up. It's just, I think word is sort of out, and we've seen like some of the, like there's Glassdoor, for instance, some of these job sites that are kind of evaluate employers, and the railroad industry doesn't have a good reputation in general. And so that the word's out that this is not a sustainable career, and that they're trying to get rid of you anyway. They don't want employees. They want to shrink the workforce. That's part of the reason this contract is so bad, is because we know it's going to reduce the amount of people we're working with. And we've already seen that reduction and seen how hard it is to work under those conditions.
Yeah, it just makes it shittier for the people who are left. So to be explicit about this, I mean, we've covered kind of most of the issues, but what exactly is missing from this tentative agreement that you and the union would like to see?
So all these things tie back to safety, and will help create safer working conditions, but address the staffing levels so that we have safe staffing levels. We have heavy machinery and equipment that needs to be inspected more, but those workers have been decimated. The maintenance away crafts and the car inspectors and things like that they need more people so that they can do the job and keep the equipment rolling safely. And kind of related to that, we need paid sick time. We need healthcare that's affordable. It's a very hard job, as you can imagine. Working these shifts is not easy on your health. Mm-hmm. We walk on kind of uneven ballast, so rocky ground that joint replacement is not uncommon before you're 50. So having adequate healthcare is huge, and it has to be affordable. In fact, it should just be paid. And then just let's get some cost of living adjustments that'll keep up with inflation. We've been 3 years without a raise, so we're really starting to feel some of those economic pressures.
Oh, yeah. So you're basically making 10% less.
Yeah, 3 years ago was pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
Yep.
Money's going less far, and I mean, I can't even, like, when I think of how could you have a family? And, like, when I think of how much sick time I have to take between my, like, self and my kid, like, how could you ever survive with one sick day? So basically you have to go to work sick, and you're shit out of luck if you have a kid, because, like, if they're sick, you can't send them anywhere.
Yeah. you're describing the problems we have. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about like the actual practical reality of having to be on call 24/7. How often are you actually called in a situation like that? And when does it happen usually?
It varies greatly. I guess I'm trying to think. I'm sort of atypical in my situation. Yeah. FMLA, federal, what is that? The Federal Medical Leave Act, is a federal law that was passed in the 80s that I take advantage of because I have a family with health issues, and so I'm able to use that to take time off for some of the chronic illnesses that are in my household, and so
yeah.
I use that to my advantage, and a lot of my coworkers do too, because that's the only way we can take time off. But if I didn't have that and I was working constantly, it probably wouldn't be uncommon to work 20 days a month, 200 hours would not be uncommon at all. I can remember one week, the worst week I ever had on the railroad. I was working about every 8 to 12 hours, and I put in 75 hours that week.
Oh, God.
Jesus Christ. I would never do that. I'm not struggling where I am.
I mean, that was many, many years ago.
I'm not built to this kind of stuff.
A lot of it's just sitting time, so I read a lot of books, or I listened to a lot of, back before we couldn't use electronic, that's the other thing, is we can't use electronic devices by rule now, but like, I'd listen to a lot of, music or podcasts or whatever back then, and it was probably before podcasts. That dates me, but
they've banned electronic devices, like all of them.
Yeah, there were issues, especially with when cell phones were first coming out, where people would be distracted, much like you would in a car, and so there was some need for like saying, hey, you can't have this, but they went from one extreme to another and just said, nope, can't have anything.
You can listen to music in a car, though.
Yep.
Like there are different,
Yeah, texting and driving a train, is that more dangerous than a car?
It can't
You're
even
on a
go
track.
anywhere else.
Yeah.
That's not a track.
Yeah, we still got to pay attention though to what we're doing. It's unfortunately.
I did want to stress for anybody who maybe doesn't know that FMLA is not guaranteed paid time off. It's just like,
It's off.
They can't fire you, if you take a certain amount of time off for health reasons, right?
Oh yeah, there's huge limitations to it, and you're right, it is unpaid.
Mm-hmm.
But it's at least protecting you from some of the firings that we're seeing people experiencing for their children being born or whatever.
Yep.
Yeah. Just elective choices they made with their lives to propagate the species.
Okay, so I have a question. Have you ever, in your time working on the railroad, been driving and seeing a damsel in distress tied to the tracks by a villain?
I am not quick thinking enough to come up with a witty reply to that. It's
That was a serious question.
Nope, no damsels in distress. I'm going to spare listeners some of the more gruesome stories, but yeah.
Oh my God.
I'm interested, actually.
Tell me later. I want to know.
I do have a follow-up serious question, though. Are you ever presented with a decision where you have to switch from one track to another? And on one side, you'll run over, someone you love. On the other side, you'll run over 10 strangers. And stopping the train is not an option.
10 strangers, 100%. Justin's on the tracks. I'm killing the 10 strangers.
Who's his loved one?
Oh, it depends on who the okay.
You've got a ranking, huh?
Yeah. No, I don't. I think the railroad way of doing this would probably be like to switch the train mid tracks and get everybody.
Just hit both.
Yeah. Back up and do it again.
Satire, folks. We don't want anybody killed on the railroad. Please do not tie up your damsel in distress and put them between the tracks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I will stress that it's not the damsel's fault. Any sort of train track tying crime is only the fault of the perpetrator.
Of Mike Franken.
It is definitely not how he or they dress. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's not forget our they them damsels.
Well, this is something I wrote down earlier in our conversation that I thought may be fun. You mentioned you have this grievance filing process that often takes years to resolve itself.
That's not fun. Let's not talk about this.
Oh, really?
No, I'm kidding. Go ahead, Justin.
And it only tends to go your way, you said, like 1 in 7 tries. So what kind of grievances have you seen filed? What's maybe the most egregious example of a grievance being resolved in favor of the employer?
Well, they've got to provide us with clean drinking water. So not having water on site or ice. We've got ice boxes or refrigerators on the train that are kept stock. Some of those basic needs things I think are pretty extreme. Just how about a place to shit and pee? If I can be crass, like some of the grievances used to be about locomotives that didn't have adequate facilities or a lock on the door. And you know, sometimes still today, you know, they can get pretty gross, and so occasionally you'll see things like that. I think those are some of the extreme examples, but not necessarily, you know, funny, but definitely things that people take for granted in their workplace a lot of times that we have to have a rule around that tells the company that they've got to provide things for being people, humans.
Yeah, right. Well, like you said, they'd prefer if there were no people involved, because that gets rid of, you know, all of those, you know, bathroom needs, water. If you were a robot, that wouldn't be an issue.
Don't have to pay healthcare to a robot.
Yeah. Although, I would think maintenance would be expensive, and you said they've been kind of shirking that responsibility too.
Yeah, cuts to the workforce there as well.
It would be less of a PR hit if a robot is destroyed in an accident versus a human killed.
The Flaming Lips song just popped in my head.
She's a black belt
destroying all the pink robots. Well, Ross, so I'm sure people listening feel for you and all of the other railroad workers. What would be the best way for anyone who's not already somehow involved in this situation to involve themselves in a way that would benefit you?
So I'm co-chair of Railroad Workers United, and I'll plug that organization real quick, railroadworkersunited.org. Just Railroad Workers United, spelled out, .org, and you can go there. We're typically due sustaining for railroad workers, $50 a year, but we also have a solidarity membership. So if you're a train nut or just want to help the cause, for $25 a year, you can support that and help us do the work of kind of continuing to get the word out on these issues. The other thing is just know we're not done yet. This process isn't over, and there could be potentially a rail labor work stoppage near you. So just kind of pay attention to those things, and just in general, just find a struggle, a strike, or anything. You know, it doesn't have to be railroad related. It could be Ingredion in Cedar Rapids or your local Starbucks, whatever the case may be. Just go out and support workers and you know, hear their stories and try to make those connections and fight for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Seems like that solidarity membership would be a great Christmas gift for your most quirky autistic friend or a new dad.
And Ross has been kind of my source for all of this ongoing stuff. So if you want to follow them on Twitter, it's at Ross Grooters. And Ross, you know, Ross's feed will keep you sort of informed of this whole process. And thank you for, providing more context to us tonight. And, I don't know anything about your job. So it was nice to learn, a little bit of what you're going through here.
Appreciate the time, and yeah, keep doing what you guys are doing.
Thank you.
And gals.
Yeah, well, yeah, we got to, include all the pronouns and everything. Listeners, I do have one request of you, aside from supporting Ross and the rest of Rail Workers United. Please vote for us as the best local podcast in the Little Village magazine Best of the Crandic Awards for the second year running. It would be very funny if we won again. It was funny last time. It would be funny this time.
Repeat.
And I think we're going to go out tonight with some local music. This is a track by Bigby Woods. Shout out to our friend Bridget, who listens to the show and has been very supportive. I forget the name of which track I'm going to use, but I'll put it in the episode description, and you should check out their music on Spotify and Bandcamp. Buy it on Bandcamp. That's the best way to support local music. Fuck Spotify. Okay, that's all. Thanks, guys. See you later.
When you're only 25 and you're trying to find a reason to slow down, you know you're on thin ice.